Hello, human people. If you could go back in time and change anything about your past, would you do it? Maybe you think you would buy stock in a successful company, or tell your past self not to date someone who turned out to be a bad choice. Or maybe you would try to warn people about some danger that ended up causing a tragedy. There are numerous books, movies, or games that involve time travel as a plot element. But is time travel even possible? Obviously, it isn't technologically possible just now, but could it ever become possible? It turns out that the answer partly depends on what exactly we mean by time travel. Suppose I tell you that time travel is possible and I can demonstrate it for you right now. I'm going to move you through time right now. Done. It is now later than it was a few seconds ago. You've traveled through time. Perhaps you're unimpressed with my awesome display of time travel powers. This is because when we ask whether time travel is possible, we don't really mean to ask whether we can travel through time at the normal rate by which time passes. Maybe that's technically the truth, but it's not what anyone is usually interested in. Philosophers are, as it turns out, but that's a topic for another time, no pun intended. You're watching a video that can be paused, ran at double or half speed, or skipped to at different points on the video's timeline. This is a little closer to what we have in mind, except we want such a power not for a video, but for real life. Some have argued that time travel is not just a possibility, but a demonstrated reality. Time passes at a slower rate the closer one is to a gravitational field, or the closer one's speed approaches the speed of light. This is called time dilation. Time actually moves faster at the top of a building than it does on the ground floor, although by such a tiny amount that it isn't noticeable to us. But in theory, if you could hang out near a black hole or travel close to the speed of light, time would pass much more slowly for you than for anyone else. But while this might count as a kind of time travel, this also isn't what we usually mean by time travel in time travel stories. In particular, time dilation doesn't provide for the possibility of traveling backwards in time, or traveling back and forth to and from various points in time. A classic problem with time travel into the past is the so-called grandfather paradox, which can be summed up in the question, could you go back in time and kill your grandfather before he sired any children? The problem is that if you could do this, then you would never be born, and therefore would not exist to go back in time to kill your grandfather. The problem can be generalized in various ways to show, allegedly, that if you could go back in time, you couldn't change anything that had already happened. Some time travel stories are compatible with this. You can probably think of a time travel story where someone goes back in time with the goal of changing something, only to discover that their very act of going back in time and trying to prevent the unwanted event was what actually made it happen in the first place. The idea here is that time travel is only possible if the only things you do are things that already happened. That is, you can go back in time and bring about things that already happened, but you can't go back in time and change anything that already happened. The grandfather paradox seems to imply that changing the past is logically contradictory. But there's something very odd about this idea. Suppose that you have spent your life becoming the most deadly and accurate assassin who ever lived, but you experience deep moral regrets about all the murders you committed. One day, a friend offers you the chance to go back in time, and you decide that you will take one final contract, your past self. Justice demands that your murderous past self be erased from history. So, you go back in time and find your younger self before you ever accepted your first contract. You position yourself with a rifle and a scope, see that you have a clear shot and feel the trigger under your finger, but at this point, logic says you can't succeed in killing your past self. But how can this be? The gun is in working order, you're a crack shot, there are no obstructions to get in the way, you have the desire to pull the trigger, and, though maybe this is the point worth doubting, you have free will. How can a thing like logic prevent you from doing something that is clearly physically possible? Suppose that you do pull the trigger. If logic implies that you can't succeed in killing your past self, then logic demands that the physical world somehow conforms to this demand to prevent you from succeeding. Maybe at the last second, a bird flies into the path of the gun, or a freak wind gust pushes your target out of the way. So you try again, and again, and again. And each time, no matter how many times you try, even if it is thousands of attempts, something will have to happen to make you fail. In all other cases, you've never failed an assassination, but now you can't even kill your untrained past self, no matter how many chances you get to do it. There are some people who believe the grandfather paradox can be solved, but it isn't clear that any of the proposed solutions ultimately work. But I want to offer a somewhat different argument against the possibility of time travel. This argument depends on how we answer the question, what exactly is time? Most people hold the view that once events have flowed into the past, they're no longer real. They once were real, but no longer are. And future events, too, are not real. They will be real, but are not real yet. This is where the problem lies. If past and future are not real, then they don't exist as destinations. You can't travel to a destination that is not real. No matter how much you want to, you can't travel to Narnia. And if past and future are not real, then you can't travel to them either. Proponents of the possibility of time travel generally reject this view of time where the past and future are not real. Instead, they tend to adopt a view of time where past, present, and future are all real. On this view, times that are not present are still available as possible travel destinations, if only we could figure out some means for traveling to them. Notice, though, that this is another problem for proponents of the possibility of time travel. No one has even the slightest idea of how travel toward a temporal dimension might be accomplished, not so much as moving even a microsecond beyond the normal passage of time, or by means of time dilation. Another thing to note about the view that past, present, and future are all real, especially the future, is that it seems to rule out any possibility of what we call free will. If all of your future choices are already fixed, so that traveling into the future would show us exactly what choices you will in fact make, then it seems any other choices are not real, mere illusions. One final problem about time travel I want to mention is sometimes called the bootstrap paradox. Suppose you suddenly remember that you have a paper due tomorrow that you haven't started writing. You don't think you can possibly write it in time, but you have a time machine. So you travel into the future about an hour before the paper is due to where you have a completed paper. Take it back in time to the previous day and copy it down. The problem here, of course, is that it looks like you never actually wrote the paper. You merely copied it. But whom did you copy it from? Well, from yourself. But where did you get it in the first place? You copied a paper that was never written, but only ever copied. This is weird, and at best, and some would say incoherent. I will leave it to you to decide which you think is the right way to think about it. Bye for now.